how to model a spoon in Rhino 6. So this little quick tutorial, I want to take you through the processes of modeling a NURBS spoon. Now there's lots of different workflows to achieve this, and I've played with various different ones over the years, but this just seems to be making the most sense at the moment. So we'll give it a go and see how you find it. So this is Rhino 6. We have 4 viewports, just a bit of brief introduction to the interface and navigating. So we can expand a viewport by clicking on the name of it, top left hand corner. So this is the top viewport, double click, you expand it to full view. And from this expanded view, you can then jump to any of the 4 views that we have, perspective, top, front, right. And we can double click on the name again to minimize it to 4 views again. So we have 4 views, we can jump and work within every single one of them. And we can have them all active or just one at a time. And to navigate around these, if you right click in an orthographic view, so that's your top, front or right click and drag allows you to pan. Scroll in and out with your mouse. Highly recommend for CAD you always use a 3-button mouse, so we get the ability to scroll in and out and right click. And in perspective, the right click actually activates orbit, which is the navigating in 3 dimensions. If we hold down shift and right click, you can pan. So slightly different to maybe a few other programs if you used before, but fairly straightforward to use for. So right click and drag, either pan or orbit, and zoom in and out with your mouse. Now there's a number of other navigation controls which you can use and get to grips with, but this is primarily, we're not going to delve into that too much. Okay, so we're going to get started, and we're going to start off with the basics of our spoon by working on some curve outlines to begin with. So I'm going to double click on my top view because we're going to be drawing this in the top view to begin with. And I'm going to leave my layers as they are. I've got my layer panels, object properties, and we're going to use a control point curve. And you can find this on the left hand side in the toolbar. So if you hover over the control point curve on the left hand side and left click, you'll activate it. Now the command bar at the top is this area up here, and this is where Rhino gives you all the information about what it's after, what it needs, what it's looking for, and shows you what's going on essentially and communicates back to you as the user. So currently we are using the curve tool, and we're starting a curve, and it's going to be a degree 3 curve. So I'm going to click where I want to start my curve. So we can either click anywhere on the grid, or we can type in a coordinate. So I want to start in the center of the file here at 0, 0, 0. So to do this, type in 0 once, press enter, and we've now started in the center of our file at 0, 0, 0. We want to kind of make this off real world measurements, so it's not some hypothetical imaginary spoon that is of no use to anyone because it's too small or too big. So the little grid, what we can see in the background are grid size. The default grid space that you have in Rhino, I'm using the small workspace. So the default grid size in that is 1 little square is 1 millimeter. So every tiny little square you see is 1 mil, and every 10 we get a major grid line, and that will be 1 centimeter. And you can turn grid snap on and off. We can do this down the bottom, and that allows you to snap to the point. So we can see here, I also have smart track on, so I get that little information next to my mouse saying that's currently 3 millimeters away from my first point at 180 degrees. If I move up, we see we get that's changed 2 millimeters to 90 degrees, and so on and so forth. So smart track is quite helpful as well to enable, and we're going to have our first point just come along at say 3 mil, and we're going to make a spoon. So we want this to be from a few number of points. So the first point, importantly, is parallel with the second point, sorry, is parallel with the first. And then from there, we're going to draw our spoon. We're just drawing half of it, and this will make more sense, hopefully, as we go along. And so I've gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the last point, I need to make sure this is parallel with my point here, and it ends on this section here, parallel with my with my first point along the y-axis, which is our green line. Now, smart track's kind of showing me all these crazy white lines, so you can turn that off if it's distracting, and just snap it in and then right click. So there we have our first spoon. Now if you accidentally place points in the wrong place, don't worry, you can edit them. So that's what we're going to do now with our point editing of our curve. So if you click on your curve, you will see that you get points turned on, and we can click on a point and then manipulate it around our space. So if we turn on the gumball, and you'll find this down here as well, where Grid Snap and Smart Track are, turn on our gumball, and we get this little widget that allows you to manipulate points just by simply pulling and dragging on the arrows. So I can pull in the X direction, I can pull in the Y, or I can do a combination, which is this little square here of X and Y, and that's keeping it perfectly flat. We're not going to move it up and down in the Z direction, but we can also rotate. So let's grab 2 points, and you see here we can rotate as well as scaling. So if I hold down Shift, I can scale in and out as well. So there's a few different options here. Now what we want to do with this spoon is we want to mirror this curve across so we can see what the whole shape is looking like overall, which will be helpful for us. So we are going to use the mirror command, but before we do that, I want to talk about record history a little bit. So record history is currently on for me. The default is to off. If I turn it off, so that's highlighted off, and just show you what happens if we don't use record history. So transform mirror, and we can create a mirror of our curve. And here, if I select a point and I drag it, you can see it didn't update on the other side. Now, if you're coming from a more parametric based CAD program, you'd expect that to happen. When you update one thing, it affects the other if there's a relationship between them. So there's currently no link between this first curve and the second one. They don't work together. So what we need to do is delete the first one, delete the curve we just mirrored, and run the mirror command again. But this time, if we click on record history, so it highlighted in bold, right click, and I choose always record history as the default I work with. You might or might not find that helpful, but recording history generally allows you to select a curve, transform, mirror, and you can either click and draw the axis, or you can actually specify it. So it's just the Y axis here. I can select that in my command bar, and you see we've mirrored that across. Now the nice thing about this is that the record history works with a number of different functions, and here if we grab a point and we edit, we can see it updates in real time, which is really nice. So we don't have to keep editing everything twice, we can just edit it once and it will update for us, which is helpful. So there's my spoon, that's looking quite good. I'm quite happy with how that's looking. But if we want to point edit a bit more accurately, we can click on the curve, and to make these points permanently visible, we can turn points on. So the command is called PT on, points on, or you can find it here on the left hand side in the toolbar. Show object control points, left click to turn points on. And now when I've deselected, the points remain on. And with the gumball, we can move things more accurately. So I can click on the arrow once and type in an amount. So say 1, press enter, and that will have moved that up 1 millimeter. Or we can just move things around. You can even turn grid snap off as well if you want to be a little bit more organic and fluid with your movement. And it doesn't really matter what the middle of this line looks like. You can have these points in any kind of shape or size, however you want your spoon. The only thing that is important here is that the top 2 points and the bottom 2 points are horizontal, parallel with each other. So you can see they're collinear. So this point is exactly on the same X, the red axis, as this point. The reason for that is if I move this off, you can see we suddenly get this horrible pinch and this sharp end to the point. Or if we move it the other way, we get a similar point there. And what we will see here in the curves will be reflected in the three-dimensional geometry. So you always get your curves right, and then your three-dimensional geometry follows. From good curves, you get good surfaces, generally speaking. So we need to make sure those 2 points are parallel, and those 2 points are parallel as well. And we did that by using grid snap to draw. So that's the first part of our drawing. So if I'm going to go to my 4-part view again, double click on top, and we have our perspective view front and right. So in perspective, what I'm going to do now is grab these 2 points here on the neck of the teaspoon and pull them up just a little bit. Or even better, we could specify, click on that arrow and say 5 mil, press enter. And let's pull that up 5 mil. And I'm going to grab this center point here and I'm going to pull that down. Now, it might be easier once you've started moving these points to fine tune it in the side view. So I'm going to do that here now. Actually, that looks a bit, let's double click. That looks a little bit too extreme. So I'm going to pull the top down and pull the bottom in a little bit. So we're getting a little bit more control, which is nice. So I can evaluate my curves in 3 dimensions before we move on. Again here, just how we made sure that these points at the top were parallel, we need to make sure they're parallel in 3 dimensions as well, so we don't drag that up or down, because that similarly gives us a horrible pinched drawing or object. So we're only really editing the middle points here in our scene. Okay, that's looking good. I'm quite happy with that. And from here, we can now start to turn this into a surface. So I'm going to turn my points off by the same button we used to turn them on. Or if you right click, you'll see if you hover over the icon, we have a little mouse icon, and the top option, show object control points. That icon shows you if you left click, you get that option. If you right click, you turn the points off. The shortcut as well for that is F10 for points on, or F11 for points off. So from these curves, we're now going to turn this into a surface. And first off, we want to move these curves to another layer. Now we've done everything in the default layer here. So if I select them and I go to the Object Properties tab, we see we have 2 open curves selected and their layer is default at the moment. So on the Layers tab, if we right click on layer 1, we can choose Change Object Layer. Click once, deselect, and you see those curves are now red. So they're now under layer 1. We can hide them, lock them, or just control them. Because files can get quite complex and you can end up with lots and lots of curves or surfaces or polysurfaces, it's very important to get in the discipline of organizing your objects right from the very beginning in Rhino. Unlike other programs where you might be used to folders automatically being created, which your sketches or objects go into, in Rhino you need to you need to manually manage your file in that way and process your objects. So keep everything tidy, and I'm going to name that as well. Click, type in CRV for curve. Good, so just about halfway there, we are going to loft these 2 curves together to create a surface. So I'm going to go to Surface Loft and select both curves and press enter. And you see we get this little network going across. Now we don't see anything solid or filled in yet because our visual style is set to wireframe. So I'll leave that window open. If I click on the drop down of perspective, I can change this to shaded or rendered or ghosted. Or there's a whole number of different viewport options. So ghosted tends to be the best of both worlds for me. I can see slightly through the object, but I can also see where there is a surface. So loft options, if you don't see this, you might actually end up with a solution like this. And what happens if you're seeing something like this is that the curves have been misaligned in the loft. So this point is being lofted to this direction. So in order to fix that, what you need to do is click on Align Curves, and then you just click on a point and then press enter to finish that, and that will realign your surface. So occasionally it might loft it the wrong way around. It's just a case of you telling it which end is which, and then it should look something like so. There are a few different loft options. We're just going to leave it on normal and click OK. We now have a surface. And the nice thing about this surface is if I turn on my points, if I grab this point and edit it, you can see the surface, because we left always record history, the surface is also now controlled by the curve. So we have that. But what's going to happen now is we want to control point edit just the surface to actually make this more like a spoon shape. So I'm going to turn off the curves click on my surface and go to points on once more. So let's start with the actual spoon section. So we want to edit these 4 points here. Let's grab the outside edges and pull them up a bit. And let's grab the inside edges and pull them down slightly. So we're actually going to do a combination of both outside up to make it a bit flatter, inside, down, maybe a bit too much. Good, so that's looking like it might work as a spoon. Bit of a sharp, it's quite sharp actually. There we go. And then for adding a little bit of surface detail, I'm going to grab these 2 points in the middle. And you can see I can do that by left clicking and dragging a selection box. Now in Rhino, you can click and hold down Shift to select multiple objects, or you can click and drag. Now if you click and drag from left to right, whatever's inside the box will be selected. But if you drag from right to left, you get a dashed box, and whatever that box touches, so in this case the spoon as well, is selected. So by using that method, you can quickly, with some practice, select exactly what you need to. So these 2 points here, I'm just going to pull them out and up a little bit using this box. So we get a little bit of a thickening of this area here, because we want to make sure it's strong where the neck of the spoon is. But also aesthetically, I want to edit my spoon. And in the middle here, we want to grab the same middle points. But when we go to grab them or inspect them, you can see all 4 points are kind of stacked on top of each other, which is quite difficult to figure out what's what. So you'll notice when you click on a point, you get these these yellow lines that show you the direction of where it's connected. So that means if I click and hold on this point, I can scroll up and down on the selection bar to select the ones we want. So we actually want this one here, and I'm going to hold down Shift and do the same, and this one here. So these are the 2 middle ones, because you see they're connected to those lines here, and I'm going to pull these up slightly. There we go, and that just helps me differentiate between the different points. And similarly at the end here, I'm going to grab these 2 points here, and we're going to change the direction of the surface here, actually pull that down slightly to have a bit of a concave, one of the 2, surface going in the opposite direction where your fingers might hold the end. Lovely, so F11 or right click on points off to turn your points off, and we have the big, almost there with our spoons. This is our surface edited NURB surface. And you can see that at the moment, this might kind of be the intent and the shape and the design that we want, but we can't do anything with this because this is just one single surface. If I go to properties, I select it, it's just one surface. There's no thickness to this at all, so we can't 3D print it. There's no way of manufacturing or making this object in the real world because there's no thickness at all to it. So a few different methods. We could just simply type in offset surface, so offset surface, specify distance, press enter, and then we get kind of this offset, but you might end up with weird things happening on the end. So we could try that, but a better method is going to be to duplicate this and then blend those 2 edges of the duplicated edges together. So let's have a go at that. So right hand side view, if I click on the surface, and you'll notice or remember that when we use the gumball, we can click and drag, and we can also click to specify an amount of movement. So example, move up 5. Now if you hold down the Alt key and click and drag, you can actually create duplicates. So you can click and drag, make a duplicate. You can do this as many times as you want. But you can also do this accurately. So if I click on my surface, hold down Alt, click on the green arrow once, type in -1 and press enter. You'll see we've now created a duplicate exactly 1 millimeter below our object. Now 1 millimeter is a little bit big, so I'm going to click on the arrow again and go 0.25 and just bump that up a smidgen, and there we go. So you now see I have a top surface and a bottom surface, and then what we're going to do is blend these 2 edges together. So fairly straightforward, just use Alt with the gumball. But before we do that, we want to edit the bottom surface because I want to change the direction of the surface on this inside to add some more thickness to the most fragile part of the spoon, which is the neck. I want to add more material here, so increase the thickness of the metal. So I'm going to turn on surface points here and grab these 2 points again, but this time I'm going to go in the opposite direction slightly, like so. So you see, we're changing the direction of movement. And similarly here, I'm going to grab these 2 points and pull them down a little bit as well. And pull that all up a smidgen. So you really can be as detailed as you want, and this is a very simple surface. There's not very many control points in this. You can imagine if you had a very complex surface, you might have more points. But interestingly enough, counterintuitively a little bit to some people, you want your surface to be as simple as possible. You want as few control points controlling the object. Same with a curve. So actually remember when I drew this curve, I used a very few number of control points. You could draw the same curve with lots and lots and lots of different control points. But the problem with that is that once you try and curve point edit that, or point edit, you end up with hundreds of different points. You end up with a really horrible, messy surface. So less is always more when it comes to NURBS. You always want to have as few number of points in your curves and surfaces as possible to get the best results. And this is to do with the way that the maths works, but also just the practicalities of having to edit lots of points or just a few. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Let's turn points off, and now let's blend our surface. So if we go to surface, blend surface, we have a few different options here. So let's show you how it works first before we turn on the chaining function. So if I click on a top edge and a bottom edge, we immediately get the ability to blend these two sections together, which is quite nice. So you can see that we can control the amount of blend. If I lock this slider, you can see we can control how far the blend takes to take, how long it is before it blends the surface, and we can change the type of blend. Before we get into that, instead of having to do this twice, we want to do it all in one go. So we're going to run that command again, and we're wanting to grab surface, blend surface, and this time we're going to select chain edges as the option. So the default here is to have chain edges off on no. If I click to activate it as yes, we click on the top edge, it selects the entire loop, and now asks us for the second edge, which is the bottom. And if we move down to the front, it says drag seam points to adjust. We can see two little white arrows here showing us where the seam is, and those are lined up perfectly. So we're going to press enter and carry on. So we need to make sure that we have our seams working together, and you can see here we have a few different options for blending. We have edge 1, which is the top, edge 2, which is the bottom, and we have the ability to control the amount of blend that they take. So before we do that, let's talk about these different options here. So first off, we have position, which is effectively just joining the two together like a loft, where we just get a straight edge. Or tangency, where we have basically it's creating a tangent surface as it joins the top or the bottom. Curvature, which effectively adds 2 points of tangency, so you can see we've actually got 2 points of control of the surface as it blends in. And then we have G3 continuity, where it has 1, 2, 3 different points of blending our surface in, and G4 as well, a much higher level of surface blending. And we can drag and reduce the amount that this takes. So if you did really want it to be G4 or G3 but reduce the amount, you can see it's very tight as to how it's reducing that. But for me, I think curvature is just going to be fine. And what we can do, we can lock these together so that they both affect the same amount. And I'm going to stick them right about there. So we'll have a look at the shape and see how that's working. It's really nice around here. How's it going around the front? Yep, the front of the spoon looks good. Now I did notice at the back something weird is happening here. So what we probably want to do is adjust our shape. So if I want to remove this shape, we can click remove shape, and I'm going to click on it, and you can see it just removes that shape from my blend. Similarly, if you want to add shapes, you can actually use the add shape as well. But there we go. So that's looking nice. If you did want it to be round all the way around, we might need to do a without auto chain. We might need to do this blend without auto chain and then join the two together, but just make sure you have the same settings. Or there's other alternative ways of using a curve and sweeping around two rails to actually get a much better blend. But for now, that's going to be fine for my design. So I click OK, and you see we now have a surface that wraps all the way around the edge. So the last thing we have to do here is join this all together. So if I right click and drag left to right, we'll select all my surfaces. We can see here in the dialog box, sorry, the command bar, 3 surfaces added, and now we can join them. So use the little jigsaw join button or type in join, and now we have 3 surfaces closed into one closed poly surface. And if we use the object properties, we can see we've got selected, it's a closed solid poly surface. So we won't have any problems 3D printing this, and it should be perfectly fine to use. So there you have it. We can make it look snazzy, change our view to Arctic, stick a surface analysis on this with our environment map, and see what this looks like in a little bit more detail. But there you go, a little quick introduction to creating a NURBS spoon in Rhino.